Hi friends, Happy New Year! I am actually coming at you from 2024, but by the time you are seeing this, it will be 2025. And today I wanted to wrap up my reading for the month of December. December was actually a pretty decent reading month for me, I would say. It was definitely a very big month. I read a lot of books. And I've been making these videos for a year now, and every single time I sit down to do one, I forget that I talk about my Storygraph stats. So let's pull those up. Okay, in December, I read 9 books equaling 2,288 pages. I had a 56% fiction, 44% nonfiction split. 7 were books that I owned. 1 was from NetGalley and 1 was from the library. I was feeling really inspired to just read from my own shelves this month, and I feel like that was a good thing because I have a couple of arcs that I want to get to for January, so I feel like I cleared out some room on my bookshelf and I can start focusing on some new releases for 2025. Speaking of 2025, I do have a video about all of the releases that I'm looking forward to in the first half of the year coming out in a couple weeks, so keep an eye out for that. If you're into literary fiction, essays, memoirs, that is mainly what I talk about here, and there's a lot of really great stuff coming out in this year, so you should definitely subscribe if that is also your thing, and we will see what the new year brings for us. Back to 2024, the month of December. I didn't find any new all-time favorite 5-star reads this month, but I had a lot of really solid reads. I feel like I really enjoyed what I was picking up, and that's really all that I can ask for. The first book that we're going to talk about is the book that I'd gotten out from the library. That book was The Safekeep by Yael wouden, and I rated this one 3.5 stars. This has gotten a lot of buzz recently because of the Booker Prize. I don't really keep up, but I was really intrigued to try this one out just based off of some reviews that I had read about it, and it was okay. My feelings were pretty mixed whenever I first started reading it, but as time went on and I got deeper into it, I did start to enjoy it more. I don't want to give too much away about the plot because I do think that it's better to go into this one not knowing anything. That's usually the opposite of how I like to approach my reading, but I do think that this is one of those rare books where the less you know, the better. I think all you really need to know is that this book is about 2 women, 1 house, and the interaction of history with desire. So the reason why I had such mixed feelings about this book was mainly because of the dialogue, which was kind of surprising to me. I feel like that's not something that I pay a ton of attention to, like the way that dialogue is written. It's not usually something that bothers me, but this book was not my favorite as far as that. It felt so strangled and stunted. I mean, I've never seen so many ellipses and em dashes and just incomplete sentences being spoken by characters in my whole entire life. I understand that it was kind of used to express the fact that the characters in the book had feelings that they weren't sure how to deal with, weren't sure how to verbalize. And I think that it could be effective for that, but it was just so overused in this case, and it ended up feeling kind of lazy, and it just really took away from what could have been some really beautiful moments between the characters. The other thing that I had a little bit of an issue with was I think the pacing was a bit off. The book is split into 3 parts, and it's not until part 3 that things really start to pick up and we really start to uncover a lot about these characters. The story is supposed to be a slow burn, so I'm willing to overlook the pacing, and I think if the dialogue had been better, the pacing wouldn't have been an issue at all for me. Jess Decker on Instagram wrote a really great review of this book, and she was talking about how part 3 really pulled things together for her and bumped up her rating of the book, and I 100% agree with that sentiment. I feel like the stakes got a lot higher in part 3, and the story became just a little bit more dynamic and intriguing, so I really did enjoy the 3rd part. That is kind of what bumped this up to a 3.5 instead of just 3 stars. So yeah, overall, I think if you're a library user, you will kind of understand this sentiment. This is one of those books where I'm really glad that I got it out of the library instead of purchasing a copy for myself. It was a fine experience, but not one that I would have felt very satisfied about spending money for. You know, there were some bumps in the road, but I do think that the issues that I had with the book could be fixed with some more editing in a second novel. So I am curious to see what this author is going to do in the future. Next up, we have another 3.5-star read, and that is The Coming Bad Days by Sarah Bernstein. This is a new to me author who I am very excited about. I just recently bought a copy of her second novel, Study for Obedience. I bought it like right as I was finishing this book because I enjoyed this one a lot and I'm really looking forward to reading her other work. This book was very atmospheric and mysterious and really quick and fast to read. It did feel a little bit uneven at times, but I flew through the first 80 pages of this book in one sitting. I did lose a little bit of momentum after that though. The last like 60 or so pages though kind of pulled me back in and I was really enthralled by the ending. So The Coming Bad Days follows our protagonist. She is unnamed. She's in her late 20s, very kind of standard fare for literary fiction. She leaves the relationship that she was in order to move to a university town where she gets a job. We see the world around our narrator start to deteriorate in ways that will feel very familiar to readers, I think. We have some really intense weather events, violence against women, and just kind of the sense of doom that is prevailing over this town and over the world. Our narrator meets a woman named Clara who kind of acts as a foil to our protagonist. She is kind of the opposite of our protagonist in all sorts of ways, and our narrator becomes very obsessed with Clara. I was a little bit let down by the plot of this book. I feel like there could have been a little bit more of a resolution to the whole Clara situation. I feel like this book really reflected the modern struggles that we have with connection and identity and just trying to figure out your purpose in the world. There's this really overwhelming feeling in the book of ambivalence and melancholy, and it felt really perfect for like the dreary beginning of December times. I think that the whole point of the book is that ambivalence and is those unanswered questions, but it just left me wanting a little bit more from the plot and from the relationships between the characters. I thought that the voice of the narrator was really engaging, and I just really like the word choices that Sarah Bernstein makes and the ways that she combines words. I feel like this is really underrated if you're into the whole depressed woman moving thing. I know I've kind of seen a shift away from that genre online recently. I've seen a lot of people that are kind of sick of it, but if you're looking for kind of a no plot, just vibes kind of deal, I think that this is a really good choice. And I do have a quote. To begin with, I explained that my life, thought of as a series of days which were discrete in themselves but nevertheless added up to a collective something, seemed inconceivable. I had now experienced over 10,500 mornings. I had woken up as myself 10,500 times. What these days amounted to remained, I said, a sheer mystery to me. Next, we have my highest rated book of the month, and that is What Are You Going Through by Sigrid Nunez. I rated this 4.5 stars. I've seen a lot of praise for this book on Instagram specifically, and I felt very compelled to pick it up because it has been on my shelves for so long. I had been reluctant to start this book in the past just because I had read her other novel, The Friend, a couple years ago, and I didn't really love it. I see a lot of praise for that book on the internet as well though, so I feel like I'm kind of the odd one out there. So yeah, I went into this a little bit skeptical but curious, and I was really pleasantly surprised with how much I enjoyed this. The structure of this book is actually, to me, kind of similar to what Rachel Cusk is doing in the Outline trilogy. A lot of the book is made up of these conversations with and stories about other people. Our narrator is quite passive for a majority of the book, and we kind of get a sense of who she is based on these interactions with others. There's a lot of really existential subject matter in this book, dealing with the climate crisis, politics, ethics, and the nature of our relationships and the way that modernity affects them. I think the thing that made this quite different from Outline, and one of the things that I really appreciated about it, was that there was a sense of stakes that was introduced at the halfway point of the book. I don't want to give too much away, but the narrator kind of gets drawn back into this friendship with someone from her past, and for lack of a better term, she does them a really big favor. That favor does really bring ethics and the politics of like living and dying into the conversation, and I just thought that it was such an interesting exploration. The friendship was also just so tender between these two women, and it just gave a deeper sense of purpose to this book. It really kind of grounded things so that it didn't just feel like a bunch of random conversations kind of cobbled together. I really liked the writing style here. I thought that it was engaging and funny at times, but it still gave enough gravity to the serious subject matter. This book, similar to The Coming Bad Days, it feels very of the times. It feels very poignant to the era of American history that we're entering, and it just felt kind of comforting in that way. I think that it really is just such a great example of how we are all just trying to figure things out, figure out life, figure out the world, and no one really has all of the answers to some of these difficult questions that come up in our lives. So yeah, I'm really excited about the prospect of reading some more Sigrid Nunez after my experience with this. I enjoyed her book about her relationship with Susan Sontag. That was more of like a memoir kind of thing, so I'm not surprised that I enjoyed that. But I have another, I think, earlier novel of hers on my shelf, The Last of Her Kind, so that'll be what I pick up next from her. But I've seen some good stuff about The Vulnerables, and yeah, I'm excited about discovering an author that I will hopefully enjoy. Next, we have a short little nerd, Valentino and Sagittarius by Natalia Ginzburg. I rated this one 4 stars, and I closed this book and literally said out loud to myself, dang, that was kind of messed up. Ginzburg is really not pulling any punches with the endings of the 2 stories that are in this book. I mean, she really just gives it to her characters. I really love the way that Natalia Ginzburg does short fiction. The prose that she uses is so sharp, and there's just kind of this dark undertone to it. I think that if you've read her other book, The Dry Heart, this would be a great next step. I really loved that book, and I feel like this was quite similar to it. I've also read Family Lexicon by her. That was a little bit longer, and I didn't like that one as much as this one and The Dry Heart. So yeah, there are 2 separate short stories in here that have been published together, and I can see why they chose to publish them together. There are a lot of similarities between the 2 of them. Both of our narrators are really kind of detached from the situations that they're talking about, and they are both dealing with unhappy relationships and talking about family and class and the way that people kind of strive to transcend their current situations and do better. So Valentino tells the story of a young man, Valentino. He is not very ambitious, even though he's in medical school and his family kind of is expecting him to do great things. He ends up marrying a much older, rich woman, and his family is kind of horrified by that. And then we have Sagittarius, which follows a mother who kind of embarks on this friendship with a woman who's kind of suspicious, seems a little bit too good to be true, but the mom is trying to make her business venture of an art gallery turn into an actual thing, and she thinks that this woman is going to be able to help her with that. Things don't really end well for anyone in these stories, so there's that. But this was a super quick read. You can read each of these stories in one sitting, so I highly recommend this as like a quick little weekend read. Next, we have my one NetGalley read of the month, and that is Salvage, Readings from the Wreck by Dion Brand. This was published on October 1st from FSG. I rated this one 3.5 stars. I've never read anything by Dion Brand before, and This was definitely a very dense and interesting, but kind of difficult book to get through. There is a lot to unpack in this book. It is nonfiction. I guess you could kind of consider it an essay collection, but Brand is looking at classic English and American literature, and she is really dissecting the colonialism and the racism that run rampant through these early works. She talks about Robinson Crusoe and some Jane Austen and a couple other books that are escaping me right now. I really like the way that Brand was combining memoir and literary criticism in this book. She really kind of put together this interesting type of creative nonfiction here. She uses this photograph of herself from her childhood as kind of this touch point that she continues to refer back to throughout the book. It's a picture of herself with her sisters and her cousin that was sent from Trinidad to her mom and her aunt, who went to London for work. I thought that it was a really cool way to incorporate her personal history and use her own experience with colonialism as kind of this prism through which to view these novels that she was exploring. I think the message and the dissection of colonialism and racism and how those things are just so prevalent in literature. I think that that's so important, so I really did appreciate that as well. And the writing in this book was gorgeous, but I did have a little bit of trouble following sometimes. I think a big part of that is probably just due to my lack of familiarity with the specific books that she's talking about. I'm not a huge classics reader, so I'm just going to attribute that to my own personal gaps in my knowledge. I think this book is a really great reminder to continue re-examining and being critical of the societal structures that have shaped literature and to just kind of keep questioning. So yeah, this was an interesting one. It didn't fully stick the landing for me, but I think that if you are familiar with the books that she's talking about in here, you might get a lot more out of it than I did. Next, we have an essay collection that I got from Sunny's Book Truck. This was their December book club pick, and that is American Bulk by Emily Mester. This was a 4-star read for me. I really liked this one. This was a little bit different from what I was expecting. I just kind of trusted CJ's opinion in picking this and didn't fully read the description of it before I ordered it, but I did end up enjoying it so much more than I was expecting, so it all worked out. I, for some reason, thought that this was going to be more of like an educational, big picture look at overconsumption and late stage capitalism, but it's really more of Mester's own personal experiences with a lot of different like cultural phenomenons that I think will be relatable for a lot of people. She talks about eating at chain restaurants, going to Costco, working in retail, online shopping and reviewing, and a bunch of other topics. So she does get into overconsumption and capitalism and everything, but it's just a little bit more of a narrow lens through her own life experiences. She talks a lot about her family in here and their relationships with each other and with the accumulation of things. Her grandmother and her father both held on to items and acquired a lot of stuff, but her grandma was someone that was like more interested in like free things and brochures and pamphlets and just any little like free items that she could get like that, whereas her father was more into purchasing like larger items and, you know, getting packages from Amazon every day, building like storage sheds for all of these things. So they both kind of clashed with each other, even though they were very similar in their accumulation. They kind of had different ideas about what should be accumulated. Neither one of them could really see the value in what the other was holding on to. So I thought that that was an interesting exploration of family dynamics. She also goes into the concept of taste and why we like the things that we like and kind of like highbrow and lowbrow stuff. So I thought that was interesting, something that I haven't really read very much about. And yeah, I thought that her voice in this was very fresh, very entertaining. I really enjoyed the subject matter that she was exploring here, and I'm really excited to see what she does in the future. Next, we have my kind of month-long project that I was working on picking up before I would go to bed each night, and that is the Selected Works of Audrey Lord, which was edited by Roxane Gay. This was a 4-star read for me. If you'll recall, I read her memoir, Zombie, earlier in the year, and that was one of my best books of the year. So I was really excited to pick this up. This was also one of the 10 books for 2024 that I had picked out as kind of books that I had wanted to prioritize this year. So I'm really glad to have checked this off of that list as well. So this book has a section for prose and a section for poetry. I absolutely loved the prose section specifically. It made me so excited to read her other collections, like Sister Outsider is one that I really want to get my hands on, and the Cancer Journals. Poetry is not something that I am super into. I've been talking on here about how I would like to get more into it. So I feel like this was a good place to kind of dip my toes into, but it was a lot of poetry to get through all at once. Probably one of those situations where it would be better to just kind of dip in and out of it every so often rather than reading it straight through, but I wanted to finish the book and it was still very beautifully written, so no like actual complaints about it. I did end up listening to the last 30% of this book via audio, which is something that I don't do very often, but I think could be really interesting for poetry specifically. I really enjoyed hearing the poems spoken, more so than I did just sitting and reading them in the physical book. My favorite prose piece in here by far was Uses of the Erotic. She really was speaking to a lot of things that I've been thinking about just in my personal life. She talks about how we all have this joy that we know that we're capable of feeling, and we need to look at all of the different aspects of our lives through that lens of joy and see what does and does not align with that joyous feeling. And I have a quote from that because I just loved it so much. For once we begin to feel deeply all the aspects of our lives, we begin to demand from ourselves and from our life pursuits that they feel in accordance with that joy which we know ourselves to be capable of. Our erotic knowledge empowers us, becomes a lens through which we scrutinize all aspects of our existence, forcing us to evaluate those aspects honestly in terms of their relative meaning within our lives. And this is a grave responsibility projected from within each of us, not to settle for the convenient, the shoddy, the conventionally expected, nor the merely safe. So yeah, really enjoyed this one. Really looking forward to getting more into Lord's work. Next up, we have the star of my final vlog of 2024, and that is Drifts by Kate Zambreno. This was a 3-star rating for me. I initially read this in the spring of 2023 and also rated it 3 stars then. Didn't really love it back then, so I wanted to revisit it for the Reread Diaries project, and unfortunately, my opinion did not really change with this. And it's unfortunate because the way that this book is described makes it sound like something that I should be obsessed with, but it's just kind of fallen flat for me both of the times that I've read it. I do think that I'm going to be unhauling this on my next half-price books trip because I feel like I've tried it twice. I don't really need it on my shelves anymore. I think maybe I would have enjoyed this more, strangely, if it had been marketed as like a memoir or kind of a journal type of thing. It is called a novel, and I just feel like maybe that is not the best designation for it. It is super fragmentary. It's these little bits and pieces from Kate Zambreno's notebooks where she's kind of documenting the peripheral activities surrounding writing. She is talking about how she's been contracted to write a novel, but she is really struggling to actually write. She's just kind of moving her notes around, thinking, reading, taking walks with her dog, and just not really making a ton of progress. We hear about the difficulties of her adjunct teaching at universities in New York City And we also get a lot of musings about other writers and artists, most of whom I don't really have any familiarity with, so I feel like that was also kind of a reason why this lost points for me. One of the things that I did really enjoy about this, though, is that we get some snippets of Zambreno's correspondence with some more contemporary female authors, such as Danielle Dutton, Banu Kapil, Amina Kane, and Suzanne Scanlon. So I've read from Amina and Suzanne. I did get one of Danielle Dutton's books out of the library, but did not end up reading it. So I really liked seeing their kind of interactions and their thoughts on writing. And yeah, that was like a cool little Easter egg. The latter part of this book does detail Zambreno's pregnancy, which I saw some kind of mixed opinions about that being the focus of the book, but I honestly thought that the pregnancy sections felt more cohesive than the stuff in the beginning. So I don't know, I didn't mind that. It is very in line with a lot of the other books that I read, so yeah, that didn't really bother me as much as I've seen it bother some other reviewers. I think that my main issue is that this book just kind of lacked connective tissue. And it's funny because I think that that is kind of the point of the book. I do have a quote here that I feel like really kind of sums it up. She says, "But I am working, taking notes and thinking. Not just laziness, I've decided, but what Blanchot calls désœuvrement." I don't know. Translated variously as inoperativeness, inertia, idleness, unworking, or my favorite, worklessness. A spiritual stance, more active, like decreation, the state where the writing of the fragment replaces the work. I saw in I think like the New York Times review of this book that her goal here was to write a memoir about nothing. I think that she achieved that goal. Was I riveted by it? No, not really. So yeah, I feel like this is like the ultimate no plot, just vibes book. I didn't hate it, but I just felt very neutral and lukewarm towards it. And yeah, I don't know. I think that there's better autofiction out there. I think that there's better writing on motherhood out there. So yeah, I don't know. I wish I had chosen a different book for the Reread Diaries because I feel like I have so many other books on my shelves that I would have gotten more out of if I had reread them over this. All right, we are on to our last book of December, and this is one that kind of flew in under the radar for me. I was thinking that Drifts was going to be my last book of 2024, but I went to Half Price Books with some friends. What day was that? The 29th we went, and I ended up starting this book that night once I got home. Flew through the first like 100 pages of it, and then finished it yesterday. So we got one final book in for 2023, or 2024, oh my god. This is Hunger by Roxane Gay. I rated this 4 stars. I feel like it could maybe be bumped up to 4.5 stars though. I enjoyed this so much. I purchased this because I read her like extended essay, Writing into the Wound, back in October, and I was blown away by that. Roxane Gay has always been an author that's been kind of on my radar, but I just had never taken the plunge and checked out any of her books, and I'm so glad that I have now started reading her. This book is super raw, super vulnerable, and it's really an extension of a lot of the themes that she's talking about in Writing into the Wound, but this book deals a little bit more with her relationship to her body and to her weight. She went through a really traumatic sexual assault when she was 12 years old, and that kind of shattered her and changed her relationship to how she views herself and how she wants to be viewed by other people. She also talks a lot about how her weight has affected her experience being in the public eye as a pretty famous author. And she talks about how difficult it has been to write about her trauma and to write about this really personal subject of her body and the way that she looks. This book is super fast-paced. The chapters are really short and it really made it fly by for me. I thought her tone was also just very conversational and I really appreciated that. It's a super readable book despite the difficult subject matter, so like definitely proceed with caution if you think that those topics are going to be things that are upsetting for you. But I really do feel like this is just kind of one of those books where you just have to read it for yourself. I feel like I am not going to be able to do it justice in a review just because of how personal the subject matter is, but I highly recommend this one if it sounds interesting to you. I'm really excited to have discovered Roxane Gay's work in 2024. All right, my friends, that is it for December. I have one final 2024 related video coming to you guys talking about some books that I DNF'd over the past year and some books that I was disappointed by because I did get some requests to be a hater on the channel. So keep an eye out for that, and then we're gonna get right into all the 2025 goodness, talking about new releases, reading goals for the year, and yeah, I'm just so happy that you guys are here with me and that we're chatting about books and that we're going into this new year together. I feel very grateful to have this little community, and yeah, just so excited to see what 2025 brings in the book world. So yeah, I will see you guys in those upcoming videos. I hope you all had a great new year and are recharged and ready to go for 2025. Bye.